If we don't find a way to heal as a nation, we will remain damaged and divided, and our country will fall. That is the truth of the matter as we wrap up this series on the astrology of Australia 2025, 2026, and beyond. So I want to use this video to sort of highlight some of the other not so obvious things occurring at this time period. We've spoken about Pluto through Aquarius, Saturn and Neptune's conjunction in early February, as well as the Jupiter-Pluto opposition, the eclipse that's coming up, and what this means from a big perspective. But there are some other things that we need to address. In this video, I'm going to also introduce you to the 1901 Federation birth chart for Australia, and this is when the states were unified into one country and we became a part of the Commonwealth. Even though we're always under crown rule, this is sort of us uniting into this idea of Commonwealth. I wanted to begin with the settlement chart because it helps us to really understand the collective psyche or the unconscious conditioning that comes to formulate this identity, this national identity. And I don't mean that as the one portrayed to us by our government, media, and corporations. I mean the one that's embedded just in the people of Australia. When we look at the Federation chart of 1901, we're looking at the enforced identity upon us by our political system, who they say we should be. Whereas when you look at the colonization chart of 1788, you're sort of more looking at who we really are from a more, unconscious point of view. What is the unconscious energetics that represent our identity as us as a unified people? Whereas when you look at the Federation chart, it's like, well, this is who we're supposed to be in the eyes of the rulers and our corporatized political system. So before we dive into those charts and have a look at them and what transits are occurring, there is a real need to sort of address healing and what healing actually is in representation to the individual and then as a collective, as a group of people, as a country. So healing implies that there has been hurt. If there's been no pain, no trauma, no hurt, then there's really no need to heal. Firstly, we sort of have to look at this idea of healing as coming from this place of where have we been hurt. There's varying degrees of pain, there's varying degrees of hurt, and therefore there's varying degrees of healing. However, though, do you know someone that's been through some significant trauma that has then used that trauma or that pain or hurt as a form of identification? Well, I am this way because of that, or you did this to me. And what they tend to do is hold on to the pain. They hold on to the hurt. They make it part of their story. They become someone because of what has happened to them. So an event or an experience occurs and a story emerges from it, and that story becomes part of their identity. The challenge with that is that when it comes time for them to heal, they actually have to challenge the identity, the belief in who they are, because it's been built up out of the pain and hurt of what they went through. Not what they're going through, but what they've been through. What has happened and no longer happening, what had occurred at some particular point in time, but is no longer occurring now. And what you find is they hang on to it. Now, we've all probably been guilty of that from time to time. Someone pisses you off, and for a few days afterwards, you're simmering, you're steaming a little bit. You're like, fuck, fuck you. Maybe we've had some sort of family disagreements where we've really fucking let it fly, and, we've not spoken to our family members for some period of time. I know personally that can go on for years sometimes, and I know through my clients' work that sometimes it goes on forever. But there's this unwillingness to let go. There's this unwillingness to let go of the identification with the hurt, the pain, or the trauma. It's like in some way it empowers them to be a certain way, and therefore it's valid for them. The issue is, as you go through a process of transformation, change, or the desire to want to heal, you're confronted with that identity. Now, it's very hard for most people to change their identity. Well, that's who I am. You don't understand. You don't know. You don't know what happened. You don't know what I went through. Now, on the other side of this too, people can strongly over-identify with their education, with their intellect, with their information, their knowledge. You have a high intellect person that's maybe invested 10 to 15 years through education, universities, doctorates, and all sorts of things, invested extreme amount of money and become someone, and now that's who I am. You find those types of people less willing to challenge their belief system and their education because it really challenges their identity. Their whole identity has been invested in what they know. So this can go on from many different perspectives, but the idea here is identity, right? Who are we? Who are we? Have we become someone because of the pain or the hurt that we've endured? So if we ever want to transform, if we ever want to heal, we have to challenge the identity. If we hang on to the negative aspects of our pain and trauma and hurt from the past, then we're going to linger in that negative identity, self-image, or collective identity as a country. Therefore, it's going to really impact and shape our future ideals, our future opportunities, our future life. And we have to understand that at a really deep level for what is going on in Australia. And when we look at the astrological charts, both of the settlement chart and of the federation chart, we can see significant triggers to this collective wound. And our wound in Australia is multifaceted. But I want to address it from a perspective that you may not have really thought about in the past, because we all know the deeper wound of the First Nations people, the stolen generation, the colonization, the stealing of land, all of those types of things. We're kind of aware of the story around colonization and the impact that that's had on the First Nations people. And in no way am I an expert in any of that. And this video is not necessarily looking at that, although it's an integral part of the story. So what I want to focus on this video is those of us, like myself, that don't have indigenous heritage. In our ancestry, there's immigration. In other words, we originated from some other land or continent or somewhere else on this earth, not necessarily indigenous to this land, even though I myself regard myself as indigenous to Australia because me personally, I was fucking born here. So if I'm born here, I'm fucking Australian. And that's no way. Whether my ancestry were from here or not, were the Aboriginal people, like the first people in Australia, been here the longest, 100,000 years perhaps? Like, did they originate here? Were they also seeded from somewhere else? Are they star people seeded by the Anunnaki? Or did they come here? Were they indigenous to, Asia? And they walked across the land when the continents were together? Like, we got to challenge this idea of origin because so really do we know beyond historical records, right? What was going on way back when? And where do we draw the line? Yes, the indigenous people of Australia were here a long time before there was colonization of this place. So whether you're a first generation born here in Australia or you're a 10th generation Australian and way back somewhere your ancestors immigrated here from another continent, it doesn't really matter anymore. If you were born here, you're Australian. Do you share a lineage with the indigenous people that existed here long before colonization? No. However, you do call this country home, and it's as much yours as it is theirs. Because this is the origin of your birth. So the perspective I want to take in this video is not necessarily to the hurt, pain, or the wound that the indigenous peoples of this land must have felt and be still continuing to go through in relation to the colonization of this country. What I'm talking about is people like myself that were born here. Even though my ancestry is immigrated back in my lineage, I don't have indigenous lineage, right? I wasn't, my lineage is not indigenous. However, I am indigenous to this country. I was born here. This is my country of birth, my country of origin, the country I call home. And I consider myself Australian. What does it mean to be Australian? What is embedded within the unconscious psyche of modern Australia and the identity of us? Let's look at that. The first chart we'll look at is the colonization chart of 1788. In the previous videos, we looked at the Aquarius ascendant and the sun in Aquarius in the 12th house. The 12th house is the house of imprisonment. So the unconscious identity that has shaped Australia's colonization, and you could sort of say then anyone that had come here from another continent, whether you'd come here and your ancestry brought you here in your bloodline, and now you were birthed here, then you still unconsciously hold on to this frequency of this identity, sun, being in the 12th house, the house of imprisonment. This was a penal colony. That's right. Even though the monarchy of United Kingdom, right, were the colonizing sort of regime that came here, the people that were sent here were criminals, right? This land was colonized by criminals in the sense of the people they brought here to be the workforce, right? To shape this new identity were prisoners. This is a prisoner island. So when we're using a birth chart to understand a wound, a deeper hurt, where there's been some pain or potential trauma, we always want to look at this symbol down here, which is the symbol for Chiron. And Chiron in astrology represents the hurt, the wound. Where have we been hurt or wounded? Everyone has a wound. Everyone's wound is varying in different degrees and magnitude. However, we're all wounded unless we have been able to resolve that 100%, and then we may be even closer to enlightenment than we think. Unless we're at that stage, we're carrying some degree of wound or pain or story or hurt from our past. And like I said, some is very significant and might take longer than this life to overcome and to ultimately heal. Yet we can heal, and you can heal from all sorts of things, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, if the desire to do so is there. However, what can quite often happen in relation to our chironic wound is it becomes buried. We want to avoid it. We don't want to address it. We don't want to because it's hurt, it's sensitive, right? So we tend to just push that into our unconscious. So when Australia was colonized in 1788, Chiron was in the sign of Gemini and in the fifth house. And Gemini is ruled over by the planet Mercury in Capricorn in the 12th house. The wound with Chiron in Gemini is around communication, your ability to communicate, to have an opinion. Now, this Chiron in Gemini, ruled over by a Mercury in Capricorn, in the 12th house, this Mercury suggests that there is an unconscious control, Capricorn, potential fear, Capricorn, that prevents us from speaking our truth, right? And not only that, this fear could be that if I speak my truth, I'm going to be 12th house, exiled, outcast. It's not safe for you to do so. You're going to be discarded by Australian authority. Perhaps this came at a time where you had this really overbearing authority. Remember, we were a penal colony, prisoned here, prisoners were sent here. And that could have been that if you spoke up or out of turn, you might have been scapegoated, right? We've got the ruling planet of this Gemini energy. So the wound is in our ability to speak our truth, to have an opinion, to express ourselves, to communicate. And it's the ruling planet is in Capricorn, and Capricorn is the goat. So we would have probably been made the scapegoat, right? As a way to sort of say, right, imagine all the prisoners got together and said, what this bullshit? The guy with the whip and the chain and the Queen's uniform. Fuck, there's more of us than there is of him. So any murmur or whisper of that could have been, hey, single you out, make you a scapegoat, right? A bit of an example to the rest of the people, and then some type of exiling. But we have, Mercury in Capricorn, and that is ruled over by Saturn in Aquarius in the first house. So there is this full restriction on your freedom, okay? A loss of freedom if you say the wrong thing, if you speak up, if you have an opinion, if you go against the ideals of the authority. And being in the fifth house, this is the house of joy, of play, of creativity, of pleasure, of risk-taking, of gambling. This is the creative expression of the people of the land. So you can sort of see that the wounding that we have is that don't speak your truth, don't ruffle the feathers, don't speak up and out of turn, don't be creative, right? Definitely don't stand out from the crowd, right? Fifth house, with the Chiron in the fifth house, you stand out from the 11th house, right? The opposite house. So this is the crowd. Don't stand out from the crowd because if you stand out from the crowd, You will be exiled, scapegoated, made a example of, perhaps potentially killed, or your freedom completely restricted, even though you were a prisoner and you're probably in chains anyway. Could it get any worse? Probably. This chart shows us a lot of the unconscious psyche, the collective unconscious conditioning of what we know as the colony of Australia, the penal colony of Australia. So, in my first video of this series, Is Australia's Identity Dead? We looked at the Pluto transit across the ascendant of this particular chart and also in conjunction with the Sun, which is happening 2026 through 2028. If you haven't already checked out that video, you can find it listed in the description below. What I wanted to do in this video was look at the transit of Chiron. Because where is Chiron now in the sky? Because Chiron has this 50-year cycle to go through the zodiac. So every 50 years, Chiron will return to where it was 50 years earlier. Hence, that would be a Chiron return. Now, in this particular chart, as this Pluto that's transforming our identity and reshaping us as a people, as a country, as like, who are we? As that's going on, we have Chiron moving through the last degrees of Aries. In 2026, we'll have Chiron move into Taurus, but we have Chiron moving through the last degrees of Aries, and that is going to put it into conjunction with the fourth house cusp of this colony chart. And the fourth house cusp is home and the roots, right? It's the past, it's the foundation of the entire chart could be looked at as that fourth house cusp. This is known as the IC or the Imanchuali, which basically means bottom of the sky, the bottom of the chart, the roots of the chart, the foundation of the chart. And Chiron is moving across a conjunction with that particular chart. So it's stimulating for us through this time period, not only our wound, right, which is going to trigger your ability to speak up, to have an opinion. Look at what's happening, right? We're having the social media ban for children in the fifth house, right? Children are represented by the fifth house. And what are they not allowed to do? There's a restriction on communication, information, media, right? The social media ban, which probably will spread and be part of this digital identity they want to try to push. Why is that actually going through at the moment? Well, because the wound that is being massaged, right? It's being brought into our awareness again. And what is that wound? Don't speak up. You can't say the wrong thing. You'll be exiled. You'll be outcast. So, what we need to do with Chiron in Aries, how do we heal through Aries? We have to heal through courage. Aries is about courage. Through courage, we do the thing that we're afraid to do. And what do we gain? We gain the confidence. So, one of the things we need to understand on an individual and collective basis at the moment is to speak up and speak out and speak your truth. But in doing so, does what? It triggers this unconscious wound that we as Australians have had since colonization, that we carry through and pass on with the way in which we live as a nation, right? And how we share information and how we speak and communicate. You say the wrong thing. Look back through COVID. Look how people turned on each other when, they spoke out or spoke against things or, brought things into awareness. So that same theme and idea right now is really being triggered in us as a nation. And if we aren't able to recognize that, to heal that, to overcome that, and to recognize these were the conditions of the past. Okay. Those were conditions of a time period when we were quite simple. We were living very simply. And there was corporal punishment. Now, yes, you might go into Facebook jail or Instagram jail, and in some cases, our brethren over the ditch there in the UK are actually going to real jail for Facebook posting. Do we just succumb to that? Do we allow this fear of this unconscious, unseen authority, this hidden bureaucracy, these rule makers, this authority, this system? It ain't the people you see up there, the political pundits. They're just the puppeteers spruiking the story. It's not them. Who do we know? Who is this? Is there a person behind this? No. It's a collection of people known as bureaucracy. Okay, so this hidden fear of like, "Ooh, you're not allowed to do that." Says who? Says who? Who? Show me the person. Oh no, it's just the rules. Well, who made the rules? And why are we continuing to live with that? Right? Well, for very good reason, because they don't want us speaking up or speaking out. Because we know the game. The game is rigged. It's rigged against us. It's been rigged against us since colonization. So Chiron is going to be moving in and out of Aries and Taurus all through 2026 and into 2027. And in about March of 2027, we have Chiron moving into Taurus permanently there until 2034. So between now and 2027, there is an opportunity to heal, but only if we have the ability to transform our identity, to change who we are as people. And that we don't have to live that way. We don't have to live in that idea, that zeitgeist, that psyche, that unconscious conditioning to say, oh, you're not allowed to say that. Oh, you can't speak up. No, we actually heal by communicating, by expressing ideas and opinions, by being creative, right? That's how we heal through this. So we'll briefly look at the Australian Federation chart of 1901, set for 1:35 p.m. in Sydney, and this is the time that we became Australia. The states unified and we, joined the Commonwealth, so to speak. So the Federation of Australia on that particular date has Aries rising at 29 degrees. So you notice in the colonization chart, Aries was down on the fourth house cusp at 27 degrees. So the angles of the birth chart, the ascendant, the MC, the IC, the DC, are probably the most sensitive parts of a chart. So when transits, progressions, directions, or any activations, eclipses, and so forth hit those points, they tend to be experienced for us, whether it's an individual or a country. So in this particular chart, if we throw up the transits for this chart, we'll see that Pluto moving through Aquarius is actually moving across the midheaven. Because this chart represents the political identity of this country, the 10th house in this case is our public reputation. Who are we as a nation? How does the world see us? And also, who is in charge and what is the governing sort of regime at this particular time? So Pluto is moving across that particular point. So there's a transformation of government. There is a hidden collective group, let's call them globalists, that are using our political system and the puppeteers that have long since sold out to overtake our governmental system, which is going to reshape our place within the world and our reputation to other countries. So where is Chiron transiting this particular chart? So Chiron, when it moves through Aries and into Taurus and across that border, back and forth in 2026 into 2027, will be moving across the first house, which represents the people. Now, this is the identity of the people that's being enforced on us as actually like this is who we're supposed to be, who we really are as a nation based on how we were colonized. It could be looked at through the colony chart, who they want us to be, who they say we should be, who they are trying to continually manipulate us to say, well, that's Australia. You could be looking at that through this federation chart. So Chiron moving across the first house of this, there is a need for the people of this country on an individual and collective level to go through a significant healing. Because if we don't, our identity will be shaped again by this idea of our pain from our past. And that's no good for anyone because what we continue to do is we continue to take that story into our future, right? And it shapes our ideals, our values, our morals, our ethics, our dreams and opportunities as a nation. It's going to shape them. Is it going to shape them in a positive way? Look at what's happening in Victoria with the recent passing of the treaty. I don't like to get into the details of things because I'm no expert in any of that, but I don't like the look of that. I don't know, something smells a little bit funky there for me. Now, with Chiron, there is an opportunity to heal from the past where the hurt has been. And one of the key parts of healing is to heal the story, right? It's often not so much what happened, it's the story we tell ourselves about what happened that continues for us to live within the pain of it. So we can't really change what happened. There's nothing we can do about that because it's in the past and we don't have a time machine. We can't go back to the future in the DeLorean and alter that in any way, shape, or form. However, we can change our story about it. And as an individual and as a collective, we first have to become aware that we are living the story of that. And that story, as well as being from this Federation chart, that story is almost being enforced upon us. Like that we as Australians should be what? We should be ashamed. We should be a certain way because of our history, right? Now, that's not good for the indigenous people of this land or anyone else. Why? Because it negatively impacts our identity as a collective. And if our identity is negatively impacted as a collective, this country is fucking doomed. There is no hope for this country moving forward if we continue to linger in this negative identity. Like we should be ashamed. I personally had nothing to do with the experiences of the past. I can only be responsible for the things that I have done, said, caused, acted upon. I'm not responsible for other people's actions. It would be like this. Before you were born, your father committed a murder. He was imprisoned, he served his time, he got out, he met your mother, and they had you. And when you come into this world, you had to go to jail because your father murdered someone. If that occurred, we would think that would be absolutely ridiculous. The kid is innocent, had nothing to do with it. How can that person suffer as a result of the father's actions? Do we need to be mindful of that? Do we need to offer assistance to those impacted by it? Perhaps, perhaps. Perhaps there are things we can do. But the biggest thing here is to learn the lesson so we don't repeat the past. If I'm to establish an identity that I'm the son of a murderer and I'm going to live with that stain for the rest of my life and wear it as a badge so everyone else can see it and I feel ashamed because of it, how am I, what are my prospects as a person, as a future? What are my opportunities? How am I going to see myself? How is that benefiting me in any way, shape, or form when it had really zero to do with me? It was just somewhere back in the past before I was here that happened, that occurred, that was an experience. Okay, that's fucked. All right, I hope those involved have done what they need to do to repay the crime and the pain. But here we are 20 generations on, still living with that shame, that guilt, that regret, that burden we carry. I don't think we should. I don't think we should individually and collectively. And I know that this particular astrological moment for us here in Australia is if we continue to do that, then we are dooming our future. We're dooming our children's future and future and future. It's not to forget, of course. It's not to forget. Maybe it's to honor the experiences of all those that have suffered at the hands of this regime, both indigenous and prisoners alike. So perhaps it best serves us as a reminder, not necessarily something that we have to wear and embed into our identity. So 2026 fast approaches. We are on the cusp of some significant changes, not only for us here in Australia, but also around the world. The transit of Chiron, in particular for us in Australia, means that we're more likely to be triggered or reactive based on a lot of our unconscious wounding from the past and the story that we've been living in relation to it. And what I'll say to you is this is an opportunity to choose a different way, to have the courage to walk a different path. You do not have to succumb to the system, the propaganda, or the persuasion of the masses as they predictively react to what is going on. Now, because of this, there's most likely going to be a split, a division, a dividing line between the masses operating from their karma, conditioning, their unconscious, their triggers, and those on the other side that have chosen conscious awakening, self-actualization. What I will say is this isn't an us against them, and this isn't the need for conflict. This is the need for those with more awareness to have understanding and acceptance and being at peace with people and where they're at. It's going to require the calling forth of leaders, of brave souls to step forward and to lead and in a way show a path alternative to the one that's being presented to us by the ruling factions. There will be casualties as there were in COVID. The idea here is that you can individually navigate in a way that you don't become one yourself. We don't create the new by hanging on to the old, and we don't create the new by fighting what is and what was. The fastest way to ascend to the life your soul desires is to let that heavy shit of the past go. The way things are, the way things were, and the way things have always been will no longer hold value to the future you. Let it go. If you'd like to take a deep dive into your own birth chart to discover how the alignments of 2026 will impact your life and get detailed personal guidance of how to navigate your year ahead to get the most out of the opportunities presented, then use the code on the board 2026 YAR to get $50 off your reading when you book within the next 7 days.